Okay, I'm Jim Martin, member of the Super Sabre Society, and I'm out here at a reunion in Las Vegas. And the folks here decided to record some of our old war stories. And so here we go. I started out Kansas City native, grew up in a Jesuit high school, went to the Air Force Academy, graduated in 1963 and selected pilot training. Went through that in Oklahoma, and on graduation I actually did pretty well. And at that time, the fighter world was all sitting on nuclear bombs and and on static alert, and it didn't sound too exciting. So I went into the military airlift, which was world traveling, and I didn't know where I was going to head in the future, possibly an airline career. So I took C-135B models out of Travis, which turned out to be short-lived. That aircraft, I went through the training and flew 3 missions, one of which was on an embassy support flight, which went around the world to the westbound, and a lot of historic sites. And then I was sent to C-141 training, which at that time there weren't any aircraft in operation, and I was in the squadron, the first squadron to get the aircraft at Travis. And you had to be a full colonel to get in the airplane, the one that we had. And so eventually Lockheed was building 3 or 4 a month, and they kind of built up the fleet. But still, I really didn't get much of a chance to fly. And the Vietnam War started building up, and they gathered, the Air Force in its great wisdom gathered a bunch of us younger guys together and said, you're all going to Vietnam. The policy now for the Air Force is to avoid involuntary second tours over there in Southeast Asia. And so you've been selected to go to Vietnam. And over on a projection, they had all these assignments, and they were all the fighters, F-100s, F-105s, F-4s, you name it, and 130s, 123s, whatever you wanted to do. And there were 35 of us and 35 assignments, and it worked out pretty well. And I picked an F-100, and the assignment went to Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico, and we checked out in the F-100. And I think the instructors at that time felt that we were going to be forward air controllers, because we're all, heavy drivers, and we came in with these big old black bags, and they kind of looked down their nose at us a little bit. But most of the people that went into and it was actually called MATS at the time, Military Air Transport Service, and they actually were pretty high in the class. They were people that were up in the upper echelons, and right with the fighter guys. But the fighter assignments were less than lucrative, I think. I mean, you were going to Europe and sitting on a bomb and not flying, and we had to maybe flying 5 or 6 hours a month. It was terrible. It didn't sound very exciting. So the MAC thing worked out, and but then again, the war started. So I picked the 100, and the instructors and the establishment there felt that we were probably going to be forward air controllers. At the time, in order to be a forward air controller that coordinated airstrikes with American troops on the ground, you had to be a fighter pilot. You had to have the specialty code that comes with being a fighter pilot. So they thought that's all we were going to do. We're going through the training, and we'd go out and fly these 01 bird dogs. About halfway through the training, the word came out, we're going to be flying the F-100. We're going to be flying the airplane in country, and everything changed. It was probably the best training for any job I ever had in my life. The instructors, some of them are here, Vito Tomasino. I don't know, I've seen anybody else here, but they took us under their wing, and they said, you guys are going to be fighter pilots now, let's get serious. And we ate, slept, and drank fighter pilot. They took us into their homes at night and during the day, and they set up scenarios on the range where we were just like we're in Vietnam doing close air support. Fabulous training. And when I got over there, I felt like I'd never been prepared for a job like that. So I take my hat off to Vito and some of the other people out there that are here. What a dedication to do that. and especially since, you know, people that previously they kind of looked down their nose at a little bit. So I went to Fan Rang, went through the training, went to Fan Rang, flew 289 missions. A couple of them, some of them more exciting than others. While I was over there, I met a fellow from the Air Force Systems Command that was from Edwards, and talked to him about the programs going on out there in the test world. And the next day went down to the personnel, which was a tent really, and they pulled out of their files, they found out an application to the Air Force Test Pilot School. I was really surprised they had anything over there like that. I mean, we were getting shelled quite a bit. I mean, there's a tent out there in the middle of the base, and you know, I'm surprised it was still there. And they had this file, and I filled it out and turned it in, and by golly, I got accepted for the Air Force Test Pilot School. And so that kind of changed my whole life. And when I got back from the Vietnam and the 100, I went to Edwards, went through that, and then got assigned to the test establishment at Wright-Patterson, which wasn't really my first choice, but that's what happened. Long story there. And following that tour and having some contacts with the NASA, left the Air Force and went to work for NASA for 25 years, and was a wonderful career, and I feel very fortunate. Okay, on May 3rd, 1968, I had a mission off the alert pad with Win Reether, who's here today, and we were scrambled to go to 4 Corps south of Saigon for a mission that was announced as Troops in Contact. So our troops were, you know, actively engaged in a firefight with the bad guys. And we got down there, and the forward air controller described the target, and he said there was heavy automatic weapons fire and small arms fire in the area. And so I decided, I was a flight leader, to do reciprocal headings to kind of keep the gunners off balance, to not know exactly which way we're coming in from to hit this target. And the forward air controller used white phosphorus smoke to mark the area and show us where the bad guys and where the good guys were. So we went to work on this area, and I didn't see any ground fire. And he said that the airstrike right ahead of us had flown in that area, and they hadn't seen anything either. It didn't change our tactics. We were still doing a tactical reciprocal heading, and all was going well. And we had high drag Mark 82s, or 500-pound bombs. We had napalm, very effective, close in to friendlies, and 20 millimeter. Now the Army wasn't real wild about 20 millimeter because they were HEIs, and they were super accurate. But they had, you know, they were explosives, and they blew things around. So they moved us off a little bit for that. And on my last pass, I pulled off the target, and the forward air controller said, our call sign was Blade. Blade lead, you got hit. You're leaking a lot of fuel. And okay. I knew exactly where I was, and I pulled off the target, and I started heading up toward Benoit, and my wingman, Win Reether, said, lead, you're really losing a lot of fuel. And I said, yeah, I know that. So I lit the afterburner, and I guess it lit off all this fuel, and it was like a 1,000-foot flame behind the airplane. And I was smoking. And we had, just a few weeks before that, we had a North American aviation tech rep that had come into our squadron, and he would periodically come in and give us an anecdote about things we could do that's not in the book, because we had lost some airplanes, and the aircraft was not designed to do an air-to-ground. It was an air-to-air airplane, and they had bladder tanks in it. And the forward fuselage tank was the feeder tank to the engine, and the tanks in the wing and the aft fuselage were electric pumps that pump fuel into that tank. And at one of these beer calls, he had mentioned that if you turn off the AC generator, you turn off those pumps and you'll quit transferring fuel, the fuel that can be suction fed. He says, I guarantee you, it will suction feed into the engine. You don't have to dump it into that hole, which is going overboard and you're losing it. And I remember that. And I turned off the AC generator. And I hadn't recalled all the things that you lose when you turn off the AC generator. The attitude indicator tumbles, and our navigation system, which was TACAN, it failed and it was spinning around. So everything was gone except I'd been in country for almost 10 months, and I knew the place like the back of my hand, and I knew exactly where to head the airplane, and I knew all the terrain features, and I was heading right for Benoit, and I was going like hell. I had the afterburner going. I was doing about 550 knots down on the deck, just screaming with this flame going behind me, and everybody telling me I was losing a lot of fuel. And I almost said, if anybody tells me I'm losing fuel, I'm going to scream. So I got up there, and as I pulled off the target, I heard a round hit right behind my head, and it was just it's like hitting a steel drum. It was a thunk that hit, and I didn't fully realize anything it had done, but it was a 50 caliber hit, and it took out the utility hydraulic system. So as I approached Benoit, and the VHF radio, or the UHF radio, was still working. It's strictly off the battery, and I talked to the tower, and they had the emergency going, and they cleared me to come straight in. And so I put the speed brakes because I was going so fast, and it didn't work. I mean, it felt like I accelerated because this utility hydraulic system. Now I moved my eyes over to that gauge, and it was 0. So I started doing a series of high G maneuvers to slow the airplane down. And I got it down to gear speed, and I had to manually deploy the gear. It came down, thankfully, just perfectly, and all the lights came on. And I did a straight-in approach and landed. And the mobile controller out at the runway told me that, again, I was losing a lot of fuel. Thank you very much. And I landed the airplane, and the gauge read 0. The fuel gauge said 0. But the engine was still running. And I landed the airplane, deployed the drag chute, and then turned off into the de-arming area, because that's, all your pylons are hot, and they've got these pyros in there. They have to clear that and clear the guns. And I pulled in there, and the fuel, I guess, was running out of the airplane. I didn't realize it. Fire department came out there, and a little bit of humor involved with this was that a couple of colonels came out, and I heard the airplane was coming in with battle damage. And these two colonels came out in their khakis, and they were all dressed neatly and pressed and all that. And I got out of the airplane, and they're shaking my hand. Thank you, nice job, kid. Nice job, Lieutenant. It's great you got this airplane back. And the fire department that was hosing down the airplane, they had the hose going, and they're squirting the airplane and all over the place. And the guy thought that this young airman thought he had pretty much cleaned up the area, and he was trying to get his cohort and the engine to turn off the hose, and he's turning around like this, and he couldn't get their attention, and he kept turning around, and he finally turned around, and his hose absolutely cut down this line of colonels. I was standing in the line myself. It felt good to me. I was sweating. I had sweated through my survival kit and my flight suit and my G suit, but he cut down that line of colonels, and their faces were, their hats blew off. Knocked their hats are off, and the weeds, and their uniforms are all ruined with this heavy water. And this kid finally realized what he was doing, and he had his hose standing there like this. And I won't use the language because we're recording this, but one of the colonels went over there and explained to him that he had done something really bad in no uncertain terms. So a little bit of humor there. I hope that little young kid kept his stripes. I don't know for sure, but he had a couple of really ticked off colonels on his mind. And it was a good inning, very successful. My wingman did a low approach, turned off the runway. He had enough fuel to get back to Fan Rang, and all ended well. And the airplane was there for a few days, and they fixed up the bullet holes and fixed the hydraulic system. And I spent the night with the buzzards down there. That's their call sign. All's well that ends well. It was one of our more exciting missions down there. the follow-up on that was that the Army commanders sent an attaboy to our unit and said we did really well. There were a bunch of, KBAs down there killed by air, and so it was good. I felt that we support our troops, and during all the protests and all the negative stuff that went on during the Vietnam War, I think most of us that were in fighter squadrons like that did close air support felt that if we could save one of these 18-year-old freckle-faced draftees that got sucked into it, then it was worth it. And anyway, that's the end of my story.
All right.